Please be warned, this episode contains graphic descriptions of violence and atrocities against people, which may be alarming to some listeners.
We were standing naked in the camp showers. Along came the report officer, Palish. The order of attention was given. The report commander strolled along the prisoners. He saw that Father Józef Kowalewski was holding something in his clenched fist. "What do you have in your hand?" Palish asked. Father Kowalewski said nothing. The commander struck him hard on the hand, and the rosary fell to the floor. "Trample it," shouted the enraged officer. Father Kowalewski would not do it. Commander Palish, offended by Father Kowalewski's steadfast attitude, removed him from our transport. We knew that the penal company and the harsh punishment awaited him for the rosary. We left Auschwitz still anxious over the fate of Father Kowalewski. We prayed for him. In Dachau, we learned from the prisoners arriving from Auschwitz that Father Kowalewski had been drowned in a barrel.
Hello, welcome to episode 6 of the Auschwitz Liberation podcast. We are now way over halfway of our podcast series. We only have a couple of episodes left. The testimony you just heard was from Father Konrad Szweda. He was a Polish priest. He received number 7669. There are a lot of priests that ended up being sent to Auschwitz, especially the priests in 1940. Those are the ones that arrived to the camp. They were sent on to Dachau by the end of the year. And then Dachau became known as the place to send Polish priests predominantly. But I would like to say we're going to start with Chris today. I thought I'll let Kate continue on something that I spoke about last episode, which is when the camp was it was just in chaos at this point, wasn't it, Kate? I mean, what happened afterwards, after the prisoners of war decided to shoot off their guns, basically?
Yeah, the whole camp is in a state of uproar, really. It seems to be every man for himself. So those prisoners of war you mentioned that were shooting their guns, unfortunately, didn't fare so well. So on the 22nd of January, an SD unit arrived in the morning and they arrested one of the prisoners of war called Andrei, who was asleep in the barracks, and they also arrested the other Soviet prisoners of war who were accused of firing their rifles. They were led behind Barrack 14, where they were lined up over a drainage ditch, and they were shot. After the SD left, some of the other prisoners got the bodies out of the ditch, and they found that one of them had been shot in the head, but he hadn't actually been killed. So his wound was treated by one of the prisoner doctors, Dr. Otto Volken, and he survived. He was then hidden in the barracks. Also on this day, the SS shot a huge amount of prisoners who were moving around the camp or trying to sneak outside the camp. The following day, the 23rd of January in the afternoon, an SS unit arrived at the hospital at B2F, and they ordered the prisoners to bring the corpse of the executed Soviet prisoners of war and to deposit them next to crematorium 5. The corpses were placed on a pyre, and in the evening the pyre was set on fire by the SS men and the corpses were burned.
Thanks for that, Kate. Chris, tell us what's going on with the Soviet advance over these next couple of days.
Yeah, so we've got quite a bit going on the Soviet front over the 4 days that we're covering in today's episode, and it's going exceptionally well for them, as predicted. The massive superiority in numbers and equipment, they're just brushing the Germans away. And on the 22nd of January, the 5th Guards Army has managed to reach the Oder, sort of northeast of Opelin, and seized a bridge from the western bank, which is huge for future operations because it means they've got a springboard into German territory. The 60th Army, the army that we've been kind of concentrating on, they roll up and take Wallachia and Skoinia, both falling on the 23rd of January. And by the 24th, the army takes Libya. So by the 25th, the 15th Army Corps has arrived at Pisiemtia, and they liberate Lipetsk, and they're now 10 kilometers away from Oswiecim, so they're really close to the camp. Other elements of this army, though, are kind of stretched out behind them, and with different sections along the Vistula and Skala rivers. So with the advance well ahead of schedule, Konev, who is the front commander, orders the 60th Army to take some time to reorganize itself, let its logistics catch up. And so they take a bit of a break between 25th and the 26th to reorganize themselves. But on the 25th, the Janengruber subcamp is liberated, with 60 sick or 2 week to leave prisoners liberated. The Polish sort of citizens nearby rush to the camp and start taking care of the prisoners as soon as the Germans leave. But when the Soviets arrive, they transfer all the prisoners, or the worst case prisoners, to a hospital where they can try and nurse them back to health over time. Right, 26th of January, the 15th Army Corps, which is part of the 60th Army, they've managed to pass on with tanks and anti-tank artillery and are ready to advance again. The 60th is now faced by the reconstituted German 344th, 371st Infantry Divisions and the 544th, 78th, 569th, and 545th Volksgrenadier Divisions, centered in and around Oswiecim. And by the evening of the 26th, the Russians are now at the Norway-Oswiecim line, so they're poised and ready. However, it's not going to be that easy. South of Oswiecim, the 371st Infantry Division is meeting the Russian advance, and they're going to be reinforced by the German 344th, who also use the Vistula River to their advantage in slowing the Russian advance by blowing up bridges. Elements of the Russian 472nd Rifle Regiment cross the river and maintain the offensive, and the Germans do what the Germans do best: they counterattack. However, it sounds grander than it is. They only have a handful of tanks and armoured personnel carriers. They have artillery fire, but they only have 200 soldiers, and in this counterattack, 150 are killed and the rest are captured, so it's repulsed fairly easily. At the same time, though, we think of the Soviets as liberators, but we also have the Prosovitz massacre in Silesia, which sees Russian soldiers shooting up to 69 Poles.
But with this advance going on, there's got to be absolute chaos going on in the camps. Alina, what's going on in Birkenau at this time?
Yeah, Chris, you're right. There is so much going on and all of this chaos on the 22nd of January. It's absolutely insane. So at about 9 a.m., approximately 80 men and women, so prisoners, they set off from Birkenau and they headed towards one of the bridges at Babica, basically one of the other villages. And they were basically, they weren't necessarily hit, but they were frightened by a load of rifle fire, firing that was going on by German troops, which forced them more or less to retreat. 10 people ended up crawling to the camp. And then this is a constant thing. They're trying to get out. They're trying to leave. They've got this opportunity. There are no Germans in the camp, but we know there are Germans outside of the camp. This is the problem. And they want to make that break for freedom. They want to be able to get out because, as you know, we don't know at the end of the day if the Germans are going to come back or if they're going to get liberated by the Soviet troops. So it's a kind of like it's a catch-22 situation here. So at about noon, a group of male and female prisoners with children tried to make this attempt to get out of the camp again, and they managed to head towards the SS barracks. And here they actually encounter an SS man who doesn't have a weapon. He actually allows them to make their way towards the railway station, and there was a train standing and waiting. And some of the Polish railwaymen began calling out to some of the prisoners and got them to board the train. And this train was heading towards Katowice, the opposite way that they should be going. They're heading further into occupied territory, but they should be heading towards Krakow. But at the end of the day, they need to get out. They need to go somewhere. They need to find help. So this is what they try and do. Out of the large group, of which we don't know exactly how many prisoners there were 3 prisoners from Auschwitz that stayed and 2 girls from Warsaw that stayed with them. They managed to continue on and reach the town of Auschwitz, the side that, even though it was occupied by the Germans, but the Poles were allowed to live on that side of the river. So they managed to reach that side where they know that they would get help. These 2 young girls, one was born in 1935, one was born in 1937. They were children, they were little. Their mother, this is probably an incredibly heartbreaking part of the story, their mother, Małgorzata, and their older brother, Antoni, left the camp during this forced evacuation. Their mother ends up reaching Ravensbrück, and then she dies in Nudstad Gleve, literally just before liberation. This is a story that we will hear continuously, that prisoners manage to get practically to liberation and they just don't survive. But just to finish off, their brother, on the other hand, he survives and he was imprisoned in Martenhausen. So we've got to remember, and I'm just going to re-underline this, that the problem with the SS leaving again and the final evacuations, that prisoners are left with no food, they're left with no electricity, no water, no nothing, no heating, and it is bloody cold in Poland at this time, and there's snow everywhere. People are dying and they're trying to find ways to just survive. Moving on very briefly, I'm just going to touch on another subcamp. So we've got to remember, even though we spoke a couple of days ago about the subcamps, not all of them were evacuated, not all of them had the chance to be liberated. So this is just one more that we're going to be talking about, and this happens on the 23rd of January, so the day after these people try and get out of Birkenau. So this is the subcamp Alara Hütte. It was part of the Laura Mill in Siemianowice in Silesia. It was owned by the Rheinmetall Borsig AG Company of Dusseldorf, and the camp opens in April of 1944. So again, this is one of the slightly later camps, even though, we seem to think that all these camps opening up in 1942-43. So a lot of them also opened up in 1944. So a transport of about 200 prisoners arrive in April of 44. Most of them are Jews from France and Holland, and they arrive to the camp. So more and more prisoners arrive over the following months, and the population rises to about 550 in the summer. And then in the days before evacuation, we've got just under 1,000 prisoners. So they were housed inside the factory. They had their typical 3-tier bunks like they would that if you go to Auschwitz and Birkenau, you'll see. They also had a kitchen barrack, an infirmary, a brick storehouse, and of course a wall that was topped with barbed wire, a very high wall that surrounded the camp with guard towers on the corners. There were only a few SS men actually in this subcamp, which is quite unusual, and the guards were usually coastal artillery soldiers, so it's a little bit slightly different than your usual subcamp here. When we come down to the evacuation of this camp, more than about 900 prisoners are evacuated from here. They're loaded into wagons that were put onto a railway ramp near the steelworks. The civilian staff of the steelworks were also evacuated on the exact same train. There were no prisoners that remained in the subcamp. So if you were sick, if you were on the verge of dying, you were forced onto this train and you had to leave. The train ended up stopping near a forest on their journey. And in this forest, the prisoners came across bodies in camp stripe uniforms that they just lay strewn along the tracks, basically discarded. Of course, these aren't human beings. They're tools. They're to be exterminated. They're to be gotten rid of. They're not even respected. The SS men that were escorting this train forced the prisoners to remove the clothes of the dead, collect any evidence, more or less, that would have shown that these were prisoners, and basically eradicate all evidence. It's most likely these were prisoners who were killed the previous day. They continued on their journey via Katowice, Ostrava, Vienna, and they headed to Mattenhausen. So this journey lasted about 5 days and 5 nights, and out of the 900 prisoners, 134 of them died during this journey. But this is not the only subcamp that is undergoing anything that's happening on the 23rd. There's another one, isn't there, Chris?
Yeah, we've also got Eintrachhütte, which is another subcamp, and it's part of the Berghütte company, which has been sublet by the SS to provide compulsory labour for loads of different duties. There's about 1,000 odd prisoners inside, and although, as I said, some of them are sublet to other organisations, for the most part, they're working on anti-aircraft weaponry, which by 1944 is really mainly the front line for air defence in Germany. So it's quite an important duty. Although it's high intensity, high labour, the conditions are much better than what the prisoners are used to elsewhere. However, the SS guards are rather overzealous in their duties and are quite brutal to the prisoners, to the point that management of the factory complained for 2 reasons. One, it's stressing out and upsetting the civilian workers who aren't used to watching people getting beaten to death at work. And also, flak guns are so damn important to the German war effort, you can't be killing the workers and beating them so they can't work, because it's actually denting production. So the SS are actually requested to leave the prisoners alone. In May 1944, there is an escape. There's a 25-metre long tunnel dug under the wire, and then at night time, the prisoners try to make a breakout, or a group of prisoners try to make a breakout. Several do escape before it's spotted by a guard from a watchtower and everything's shut down. There is a Gestapo investigation and they can't find anyone responsible for it. So they actually get away with that one. As I said, there's about 1,200 prisoners in Eintrachhütte by January. They're similarly sort of moved out in the style that we're getting used to. Open cattle wagons on trains, lots of manure on the floor. Plus you've got the snow coming in. You get several people dying in the transport. But they arrive in Mattenhausen after a few days on the 30th of January, where they're admitted. On the other hand, Eintrachhütte subcamp, there remained a few dozen patients, and the ones that are too sick to move or too weak, and they're liberated. And these people are liberated and moved to hospitals by the Soviets when they arrive.
We have indeed, yeah. So on the 25th of January at 2:00 in the afternoon, a detachment of the SD arrived at the women's camp and part of the men's camp as well in Birkenau, and they ordered all of the Jews out of the barracks. In another section, the Jews were pointed out and they were chased out of the barrack block by their capo, a man called Schultz. Some of them had already made an effort to hide. They'd prepared spaces for themselves under the floors of the barracks, for example. But about 150 Jewish men and 200 Jewish women were led outside the camp gates. Several Jews were led behind the Block Führerstube barracks, where they were shot. Those who could not follow the people marching, the columns that were leaving the camp, were executed. They were shot. A transport of marching prisoners was stopped by an oncoming car full of SS men. The prisoners were ordered to go back to the main camp, while the SD officers drove off with the SS. So some of the prisoners returned back to Birkenau, while others went back to the main camp of Auschwitz, as ordered, a few kilometres up the road. Then another SD unit entered the main camp. All of the sick prisoners were ordered to get out in front of the block, which was near the gate with the famous sign, Arbeit macht frei. German citizens were ordered to line up at the front, followed by the remaining non-Jews and finally Jews. Then non-Jews and Jews who were unable to walk were lined up separately. The residential and hospital blocks were inspected, and anyone who was hiding or who was resisting this deportation were driven out. The behaviour of those doing this proved that prisoners would be shot. While the prisoners were being got ready, set up, a car with SS men arrived, and after exchanging a few words with them, the head of the SD unit ordered the prisoners to return to the blocks. The SD unit left in a hurry, again together with the SS men. So it's just chaos. People are being ordered out, got ready to march, and then they're being told to go back. It's just a mess. So, Chris, while we've got this chaos reigning in the camp with prisoners, is there much order? Is there much destruction of evidence, for example?
Yeah, okay. As we sort of talked about on previous episodes, the SS are in a hurry to try and hide as much of the evidence as they can. You've got demolition and dismantling of facilities, the burning photographs, the burning documents, they're burying documents if they can't get it burnt quickly enough. But also, strangely, at the same time, you've got crematoria 5 still being used, and it continues to be used until the 26th of January, whereas the other crematoria have already been destroyed, and they're destroyed, well, mainly they get the prisoners to go in and then drill holes in the walls and ceilings, which they then pack full of dynamite and then detonate it. But yeah, crematoria 5 is still operative up until the day before liberation.
Well, that is the end of episode 6, covering over quite a few days actually, from the 22nd of January all the way up to the 26th. So little bits and bobs happening all at the same time. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you in a couple of days' time for the 27th, which is actual Liberation Day. We have a lot to cover and a lot to talk about, and it will not be our final podcast. We still have a couple more to go after that. But if you do want to hear some extra content, please make sure you head to our Patreon account, our Patreon page, and or if you'd like to give us just a one-off donation for our hard work, then feel free to head to our Ko-fi, which is ko-fi/moments in time. And we will see you soon. Thank you so much again for joining us.